When you look at a list of the most important players to their teams in the pro scene, you see a lot of obvious candidates. You see Donk, you see Shiro, Nico, Monacy, these types of players, and even players like Elige or Keisaradu who are very important to their team in that they kind of carry their team in most of their wins. So you're kind of expecting them to be players where if they have an under 1.0 rating, their team is very likely to lose. However, a name you might not have expected is Jimmy, who is actually, based on this data, the most important player to his team's success in the entire pro scene, despite the fact that Mao's has a pretty balanced amount of talent, right? It's not like you have any one necessarily super hard carry. Zershin is probably close to that, maybe Torji after that, but Jimmy is number one. And that Mao's is 0-10 if Jimmy is under a 1.0 rating in the last 3 months. Now, if you look at the list that I'll have on screen, Keisaradu has the same amount of wins, which is 0, and more losses. However, I found that generally, if your team gets blown out 13-1, there's a pretty high chance that nobody on the team is above a 1.0 rating. So I used that to find the team average. I found the team average, like expected loss if a player has under 1.0 rating, and then I balanced the individuals against that. So Mao's doesn't get blown out very often, which means when, you know, the team on average doesn't have a lot of players on this list, whereas if you look at Furia, I mean, Yuri's on this list as well, right? Mainly because of that. The thing is, it actually makes a decent amount of sense what actually goes into why Jimmy is so important to his team. Now, the reason I noticed this is because I actually noticed this with Malbs when I was just going through stats on HLTV. I noticed that Malbs was seemingly more important. Again, there's a sample size problem. For example, Zaiwu isn't even on this list because Vitality is 2-2 when Zaiwu has an under 1 rating, which by the way is ridiculous that he's had that few when you look at the rest of this list, which is great players that have 10 or more. But if you look at Jimmy's role, well, to begin with, he's an anchor on pretty much every CT side, which means option A, they lose the site he's holding, in which case the team is probably losing the round. If you lose B on Dust 2, unlikely that your team is going to win that. So if you're just having a really terrible game, then yeah, there's a pretty high chance your team is losing. Alternative to that, if your team is having a really bad game in general, then you're expecting that Jimmy's going to be rotating into a bomb site that isn't going to be doing very well and trying to retake it, which is just going to end up with him dying. And that is why, I mean, Malbs is a CT side anchor you're expecting, so you might be expecting these types of situations, but there are other anchors like Naf isn't very high up despite being an incredible anchor on CT sides. You've got Donk and Elige obviously on there. It's not quite exactly that, but it does seem to make sense with these CT side roles exactly how that's going to be going. Now, the other name on this list that I thought was actually quite interesting was Rops. FaZe is 2-15 when Rops has an under 1.0 rating, which is not quite what I would have expected. But I mean, look, this stat isn't perfect, right? There's lots wrong with this stat, but I think it does say something. Maybe even you have to balance it out for roles potentially, because certain roles seem to have more correlation than others, but that's kind of the reality of it. And I want to just take a look at this game against Imperial, where, I mean, most of the team does well. The only player under 1.0 rating is Jimmy and Shuhei. And it's a team that they should generally be beating. So I thought this is a team that would be decent to take a look at. And in fact, Jimmy actually starts out this game doing quite well. I think he gets, you know, he's like 7-4 at the beginning of this game, but he's going to end it with an under 1.0 rating. And it actually ends up, I think, being mostly the T side that's contributing to this outcome, despite the fact that it seems to make more sense that your CT side role is going to have your most impact in the outcome in that way. So I mean, here, he's already got a kill in this round. He's just going to get try after the bomb plant, free kill, and there you've got a 2-2 scoreline right off the bat. So B anchor, not exactly the most fun role in the entire game. One of the things you'll notice Jimmy does quite often is he kind of looks for that door smoke. I don't know if you're going to see that often in Pugs, the fast door smoke, because it's a bit of a complicated lineup to get consistent, but he looks for that so that he tosses down a little more utility, and he calls his mid player over, I think, to help out when that happens as well. You're going to see Imperial actually do go for some B plays early on in this game, and Jimmy does a really effective job at holding these. Part of the problem, though, is that when it comes to being an anchor, especially B on Dust 2 or like B on Mirage, it's a matter not of how well you hold it necessarily when they go there, but of how consistently you hold it when they go there, right? If they go there once and you get a 3K, that's great, but what you really need to be doing is very consistently getting 1 or 2 every time they go, and not having rounds where someone can lurk B and just 1v1 you and get the kill, because your entire round can absolutely collapse in seconds based off of that. And one of the things I was expecting when I was looking at this type of thing is that I was expecting that maybe Jimmy was a very passive B lurker, and that opponents would sometimes kind of do what they did against Nexa when Nexa was on G2, which is they would the round would be going kind of sideways, and then they just look for that 1v1, and maybe he loses those a little more than he should. But that isn't really the case either. In fact, like, I've watched the majority of this half already just to get a feel for it, and Jimmy does a fantastic job. So the question does end up being more so, what is the T side looking like? What is the situation there that's causing this? Again, there are, of course, problems with it's not the best sample size, but this does say maybe something, because most of the other names on the list are more or less what you'd expect, right? But this round, Jimmy's just going to end up going for a cat flank. This is the kind of situation I'm thinking of that's very hard as a B anchor. You're in a 3v4. You've got to retake, not the greatest position of all time. If you hit some nice shots, you can get it done. He gets the first kill. Instantly dinked from a player towards Gandalf. Doesn't feel the greatest. And a nice little play, but he just doesn't quite find the timing onto Decenty to get the kill. And if he had, it looks like if he had, they probably actually would have won that round, assuming the player on the bomb had a kit, but unfortunately doesn't grab that. Decenty, left with 17 health, wins the 1v2, and then you've got a 4-3 scoreline. So this round I almost skipped over because it so little happens, but this is one of the ways that, I mean, this isn't really going to impact his rating though, but this is one of the ways that a B anchor can potentially cause problems, right? They lose a player, and when you lose a player, sometimes rotating off of the site can be somewhat useful, but rotating this heavily off of the site feels a little ridiculous, since they're not in a 4v5, they're in a 4v3, and Jimmy just ends up looking back over towards B, and it's, oh well, they have B bomb site control. So it kind of just, like, the round goes from very winnable, like, or winning, to losing in a matter of seconds, just based off the fact that they found that gap. And of course, these are the risks, like that's a risk that you're willing to take once in a while. I don't think you want to leave that big of an opening at a 4v3, but the idea is that generally your opponents aren't going to walk out B on Dust 2 unless there's certain timings, and I feel like there must have been something else they know. Maybe Imperial is a team that just, like, sits long and goes A or something, or there was some confusion, because it does seem ridiculous in a 4v3 to just, like, full on rotate off of the B site. But those risks where you rotate your B player over towards mid to support mid and go fight in middle, that's very common, right? When you lose a player, the round's kind of going sideways, and you're in a 5v4, for example, as a T. Are you going like, yeah, time to walk out B tunnels? Like, that is a little bit ridiculous, right? In general, usually that's not going to happen all that often. The chat on the left, by the way, is kind of funny, because they're talking about Jimmy just turned 18. Well, now first they're talking about this back on TeamSpeak, and then they start talking about Jimmy just turning 18. How's your Portuguese? I don't want to repeat anything they're saying. Hi, who the hell knows what they're actually saying in chat? Jimfat is 18 final. Is it people, dude? I'm like, is it Yimpat? Jimfat? Which one is it, man? People just call him Jimmy because I guess they get corrected so often. Kind of like the Zaiwu thing back in the day when, like, people kept trying to say it was Zaiwu when it's supposedly supposed to be Ziwu, but then whatever. Usually you're going to see most teams, I think, recently play spawn-based. I don't know, actually. A lot of teams play spawn-based. I don't know if most teams necessarily play spawn-based, but in Pugs it's very common now to play spawn-based, especially because your long spawn matters incredibly. It's very important. That's why you saw Jimmy take the op from Torji there to go for that long peek. The timing is extremely important. Your B spawn also kind of matters as well, because the timing is that with the best T spawn, they can actually cross these boxes really safely. But if you have the best CT spawn, I think you can actually see that and prevent it from happening, or at least you can hear it, which does actually make a pretty big difference. You can also use some of the best spawns to go for B pushes and those sorts of plays. But, you know, regardless of which side of the map he's on, it seems like Jimmy is going to be the guy playing a bit of an anchor role. But I mean, somehow it's a 4v4 or 4v5 A site control for Imperial and just an A site retake out of Mao's. Not exactly the situation you ever want to be in. Although actually Jimmy with the kit comes incredibly close to defusing that. Well, I don't know, incredibly close. He comes surprisingly close to defusing that. Like, I wouldn't have expected that. Regardless, 5-4, and you can tell he doesn't see anyone for quite a while here. In fact, a long while, a very long while. Even the next round, perhaps. One of the things that I think Jimmy is really good at doing that people notice is that Jimmy's really solid at knowing how to hold on to his utility and milk just that little bit of extra time. That extra 5 or 6 seconds he milks out of that smoke before he throws it a lot of the time. Holding on to his molly here. Just finding a little bit of additional benefit out of the utility than than an average B anchor would. It's very small, but I think it actually does make a relatively big difference between good and great anchors when you can just delay your opponents for that extra 5-10 seconds so that your team can get the job done on the other side of the map just a tiny bit more effectively, especially if you look at somewhere like B on Mirage, or even A on Mirage, right? Like if you can get that 5-10 seconds of extra delay time, that heavily impacts how well your teammates can fight over middle without having to worry about you. And once they have to worry about supporting you, then fighting over middle becomes a bit of a problem, right? But here, Jimmy ends up playing towards back plat. He doesn't actually see anyone until the end of the half. I mean, I actually posted on Twitter the other day, like a note, like noting down every engagement I had for a full half of CS as a B anchor on Mirage. I literally saw pistol round and then like 3 enemies for the rest of the CT half. Now, of course, my team was just destroying them at the very beginning of every round because they kept running out mid. But I mean, this is a face at 10 pug. You're not expecting like that level of trolling. It's not like we're playing silvers. But like, yeah, it was possibly the most boring experience of my entire life. So I all that to say, be nice to your B anchors on Mirage and Dust 2 especially. They don't get a lot of love. If they're having a bad game, it's easy for them to get exploited. And like, if you're ever playing people that are like much higher ranked than you, sometimes they're gonna look for a pick onto you as like a B Mirage anchor to try and catch like the free kill because it's such an easy win. And you have to be so consistent at winning duels when it's like you go rounds and rounds without seeing players. Beginning the T side, Jimmy he was 7-5, now he's 7-6. Immediately gets absolutely destroyed on pistol round, right? So he didn't really have much of a chance there. He's going to end up with, P250 in this round. Almost gets a kill, just gets a dink. I mean, here's the thing. If you have a player like Jimmy under 1 rating, most likely a lot of it's not really necessarily going to be his fault. The question might end up being, how does he manage to get over a 1.0 rating if the roles he's in don't necessarily lead you to having great stats? That could be another question, as opposed to what roles is he in, and how do those actually impact his stats, right? If he's just on this T side, if he's consistently, for example, if he was consistently running in first, then, well, it's going to make a lot of sense. You anchor on CT side and you entry on T side, then you're not expected to get the greatest of rating. But then the question is, like, why aren't they winning at all when he doesn't have a great rating if he's not expected to have a great rating? I think typically on T side, you're expecting a player that's like 2nd or 3rd in to be most likely the player that their rating correlates most with winning the game. If they're 2nd in, they're really set up to find kills. This is what a lot of what Malves is doing on G2 recently, although not like 100% consistently. I think it depends on the opponent a little bit, maybe, but I saw it in the demo me and Austin did, where it's like he was running in 2nd, and if he just doesn't get a kill, it's like, well, then the whole round collapses because he's most set up to get those kills. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Jimmy 2nd in. By the way, I looked at Hunter. It was like 50-50, I think, or something. They might have even had a positive win rate when Hunter had under 1 rating or something ridiculous like that. So this is what I was talking about before, where you're not really expecting your opponents to walk out B like this, and when they're already up in numbers. Maus are a team that are ready and willing to take these sorts of risks and exploit teams when they have tendencies like this. And I think Maus, when I've looked at it, I think Maus, I don't want to say necessarily that they're the team behind Navi, but from my impression of Maus, they've had some of the best counter-stratting from when I look at teams that I know of, right? Like when I look at Maus versus Spirit, I know Spirit has some tendencies, and I can see Maus absolutely exploit those pretty aggressively. And the problem with that is that, sometimes they're going to exploit them and their opponents are going to change things up. And I think that could definitely could contribute to why they struggle so much against FaZe potentially, but it's just an interesting idea that maybe they have an idea of the way Imperial likes to play in those sorts of 4v5s, or maybe I just didn't realize, and they could hear someone leaving the bomb site at the time, because I have some nasty Nas coming through the headphones when I'm doing these. Actually, not usually, okay, but that's what I got on right now. I got the song that goes backwards on right now. I don't know why anyone needs to know that. Okay, so Jimmy throwing the flash initially to get cat control. So he's like the opposite of a space taker. You might even call it a space demaker. No, he's like this, throwing more supportive utility. And he's what, 4th out here? I've watched very, very little of Jimmy at all on almost any map, because he just plays roles that aren't all that flashy and thereby aren't all that interesting to make videos on, especially. So I've had very little input on Jimmy, but I think in theory you usually expect the side anchor to be more supportive on the T side, and that looks like what Jimmy's mostly doing. And I'm still wondering how this ends up being a game where he's under 1.0 rating, because I think KD is one of your most important contributing factors to your rating. I think kill to death and kills per round, I can't remember exactly. It might have been rating 1.0 where kills per round was the most important, but I think if you look at KD and kill per round and combine those, you're probably going to see mostly a pretty big correlation to good games, right? And he's already doing pretty well. Although his KD isn't amazing, he does find 2 more. So I mean, he's 11-9. His game does go all the way, so I can see why this, his scoreline can still potentially adjust. But he's definitely been doing his job, if, more than his job for the entirety of this game. But yet he's still barely positive, right? I think part of it is that he's just put in a role that is very hard to succeed in, and he just typically seems to be finding quite a bit of success. So there's a lurk smoke that's worth knowing. I mean, there's not a great lineup when you're looking through a smoke there. If you throw it enough times with an actual lineup, you can get a pretty good vibe for it, a pretty good feel on where you should be lining up when you're... Oh my god, Jimmy. Oh my god. Oh my god. He just noticed them at the last second. I mean, you cannot put that on Jimmy at all. He just had a nade out. They just had him go to the side of the smoke. That's probably part of the strat. There's a strat on Inferno. It's called a lot of teams have different names for it, but I used to call it the A-site re-exec on Inferno, where you smoke off to get your team into pit, and then you kind of exec the site from inside of pit. You actually molly most of site, smoke moto, like you kind of like exec into pit and then re-exec into the bomb site. That almost felt like part of what Jimmy was doing there, where it was like that lurk smoke provided enough cover for Jimmy to go behind that lurk smoke and then use it as cover to throw some utility to clear out the bomb site, which is actually like a really smart way of playing. Here, I mean, Jimmy just got heavily timing, I mean, it's a good and a bad thing, because he gets timing in that they push tunnels right after him. But if they push tunnels before, oh my god, he just gets absolutely fucking destroyed. If they push tunnels like a second earlier, they might have actually fought him, and he could have just lost the bomb and lost the round. But I mean, that might be a way that Mao's loses when Jimmy does badly. He is on T side, he's the B tons lurker, right? So when you're looking at the B tons lurker, especially if you're having him with bomb duties, that means if he dies, especially if he dies with the bomb, but even if he doesn't die with the bomb, someone's gonna have to go back and grab the bomb. It puts you around in a pretty bad situation. Now he's just up with a Glock. I'm not even interested in this. I mean, let's be honest. He's just full Glocking. They've got guns dropped over to other players. He gets actually quite a bit of damage done. I mean, I'm not sure ADR has a major... I think ADR is impacting your HLTV rating, but it's like, I don't know if it has like that big of an impact, because I feel like he is getting I lied. Okay, I feel like I take it back. I feel like I've noticed that he does no damage. He's just terrible at getting any ADR. All right, man, dude, Jimmy, how does this guy live his life? Is he just like, I don't want to say anything that's going to get this demonetized on YouTube. Is he just like doing don't do drugs, kids, just to keep himself awake while he's just like jiggle B tunnels on CT side, jiggle B tunnels on T side? I wanted to look at the Mirage game against Na'Vi, but I was like, the problem is they started CT side. And it's almost like when you open up a VP game on Inferno, it's like people are already left. They're like, oh, excuse me, B Mirage CT side? You're reviewing a B Mirage player on CT side. I'm gone. See ya. And it's like, it's the same thing with VP on Inferno. It's like, you're telling me you're about to analyze a VP game on Inferno? I would rather die. Like that seems to be what the immediate response is. But I mean, this is another round. He kind of was second in here. I don't know if this is necessarily intentional, but he does end up being second in here right behind Xershin. And this does feel like, think about this for a second. Look at this situation. They're 5v4 for sure. But if he doesn't get this trade kill, if he doesn't get this kill, and he absolutely destroys Vinny. Like, that is a really fucking quick trade kill. But look at what happens if he doesn't get a second kill here. If he doesn't get the kill right away, Vinny could easily get 3. You know, the player behind Jimmy has a nade out. Yeah, Brawlin has a nade out, right? So if Jimmy dies there, you can see how that round can immediately fall apart and get changed into a losing round in seconds just off of him dying. And it's not that he's like necessarily set up for success, but he is set up in a position that's kind of pivotal to the outcome of the round, which is exactly what you're expecting with this type of like reliance stat. I call it reliance, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that. Their reliance rating is how much their team relies on them having not a terrible game to do well. And there's players that, you know, you would expect on there, and there's some players that you necessarily generally wouldn't, to be honest. But Jimmy again tosses the lurk smoke. I mean, Mouse is just absolutely running over B site. Like, that's where they've found like their only wins, isn't it? Like, I mean, sorry, I shouldn't say running over. They're attacking the B site, right? Very heavily. Now, I think they actually just got spotted by this Opper. Not this Opper. This Opper. Did they not just get spotted by this Opper? It looked like Jimmy peeked out just earlier. Okay, the smoke's going. That's unfortunate. I mean, I don't know how much that can be. I don't know what the like, it's obvious that they just think that smoke is going to last like an extra couple of seconds, because if that molly lands a second earlier, then they're in a pretty good spot. Although, to be fair, I think they also probably, did they know there was a second op? Because they might have heard the one op towards A and just thought there wasn't a second op. And if there's a guy back plat and there's, you know, you're expecting one op, if he's back plat with a rifle, I think you can kind of get away with fighting like that. But Jimmy also just wasn't seemingly ready for that player to be there. It looked like he wasn't ready for that smoke to come down at that timing, because you want to be aiming at that spot usually anyways. But either way, now you've got the tons push coming out of Decenty. Jimmy's playing this in a certain way. And this is so I've heard people talk about this, like, is this even worth jump peeking? Should you ever jump peek this? Because for a long time, you would have everyone would just come over, jump peek this to clear it. Sometimes it gets you a kill. A lot of the time, it gets you dead. But the problem is, if you don't clear that, this happens, where you're like throwing utility and Decenty's just right there, and he's like, okay, so you're throwing utility, okay, so I'm just gonna kill you. Oh, well, Decenty considered peeking into Jimmy and killing him, but actually just held the angle, and Jimmy ended up strafing into him. But then as soon as he kills Jimmy, it's like so obvious that this is not a B play because he's the only player there. How do they win this? So I know this goes into overtime, but it's ridiculous that this goes into overtime, because was this not just a 2v5? This is a 4v5? 3v5? 3v... Okay, 2v4. It's a 2v4. I mean, this is still a straight up 2v4. Maybe Try ran out of ammo, so he pulled out his pistol, or maybe it just wasn't, like, he just kept his pistol out there just because he didn't want to, like, close range someone with an op that was going to jump on top of him or something. But now you're into a 2v2. Yeah, Jimmy died without getting a kill here. You can see by the scoreline, I mean, Jimmy is 12 and 16. It just doesn't feel like he's had that bad of a game, though, you know? I really want to take a look at another Jimmy demo where he has a good game and see what it's like, because it just doesn't feel like Jimmy's been given many opportunities, right? He doesn't feel like he's done all that much wrong. Maybe a couple of small mistakes, but like nothing like egregious. So B-Rush, that's mostly just going to be spawn based. I think Jimmy was third. By the way, if you're noticing the cuts, it's because I'm coming down with a bit of a cold, and I know I'm going to be sick for the next few days, so I wanted to make a review before then, because it's already been a couple of days. But I am coughing a little bit. Not that anyone gives a shit. I think Jimmy was third out there. Again, another dude, like, his aim is on point. He's just, the question, like, how is he 14 and 16 when it's like he's doing this well? He just hasn't really been given very many opportunities. This must be why, like, I see people talk about Jimmy as like this dream pickup for certain teams, and I can see exactly why with like what I'm actually seeing. Like, if you watch a lot of Jimmy demos and he plays consistently like this, like, he feels like the dream player. Like, he's just goes like 3 rounds without seeing anyone, and then insta-gibs the first player he sees. And so many of his deaths, when he dies, I bet you he's going to whiff a whole clip and then die here. I bet that's what's about to happen. But so many of his deaths, when he does die, are deaths where he really didn't have a chance, you know? Okay, got sidetracked a bit for a second on some stuff that didn't make any sense, but back to it. Jimmy doing the same thing he's done every round. Does he get any kills? He does die this round, it would seem like. After rotating. I mean, last round, he literally just sat B tunnels, his whole team died, and then they walked out B and him and his teammate died. Here, He's going to be second out. And Brawlin ends up getting the kill, but I mean, they both, either of them could have got that kill. It really didn't make a difference, just like, depending on which bullet. Gets stuck on Torji trying to back around a corner. That's unfortunate, but that's reality. I'd say Jimmy is, I don't know, he's not like dedicated second guy out. He's more like typically support, but it looks like if he doesn't have utility, he will somewhat often be the second guy out. And that is, so far as this goes, it's 2 for 2 now on more often than not these types of players that if they have a bad game, their team is fucked, are players like Anchor on CT side, second down on T side. That seems to overall be the general situation. And I think that all adds up. So the thing is, I think to some extent you have to take role into consideration when you're doing a lot of these stats. For example, when I did my gun round versus gun round statistics on the pro scene, and I looked at like what players had the highest kills per round with guns against guns. So basically, if both teams are buying, because a lot of players end up eco hunting quite a bit, or not eco hunting, but just performing really well against ecos. This is just a nice play from Jimmy, by the way, to get the 2K already. Unfortunately, Actually, I don't know if they win there or lose this one, but different players, you could see groupings, I would say, of their KD or their kills per round. So like site anchors, their kills per round would be quite low, but their KD would be quite high. And with more rotator players, it would be kind of the opposite. Their kill per round would be quite high, but their KD would be relatively low. And so I thought it made the most sense a lot of the time to analyze these players as like site anchors. You probably want to see more of the kill per or KD in their case, because if they're really good, their kills per round might even go down. Because if you play against a bad B anchor, you're going to go there a lot more often, right? Like if you play against a good one, you're probably just going to say, fuck that, go to the other site. So you want to look at their KD for site anchors. That was my thought process when you're looking specifically at CT side. And then you want to look at kill per round for rotators, because that's about being in the right position at the right time and all that type of thing. And KD matters a little bit, but you compare it. What I mean to say is you compare it within the role. Like you compare oppers to oppers, anchors to anchors, supports, so on. And I think that might be the same with this type of like, this was just a cool stat. I mean, I wasn't trying to say that this is like defines the pro scene and definitively says whether a player is more important to their team or not. But this does seem, I mean, it seems to have some correlation. And it is interesting to look at to see how this actually impacts different teams in different ways. So 15-14, I mean, Jimmy's had mostly like really unescapable deaths, to be honest. Most of his deaths are just like insta-gived or traded or, you know, kind of unwinnable situation. That's like more or less the situation for the majority of them. But there have been a couple rounds like this, and this is going to be another one. But this one's a lot more forgivable. I think I'm pretty fine with this. You saw Imperial do this as well. I think this is totally fine. The reason I didn't like it previously is that previously what you had was Mao's in a 4v3. And Jimmy was like on A, and they didn't have anybody even mid. They had nobody anywhere near. Now you've got Mao's in a 3v4, and you've got Jimmy mid and 2 players A because they've already got long. I think this is completely reasonable. One of the small things, by the way, I hate how they made the scope like foggy. It's almost like smudged. I mentioned this before in a video, but if you don't do this, this is worth doing because everyone does it. If you ever get caught off guard like this, you're going to notice as Jimmy spots try, he's kind of caught off guard because he's kind of aiming up. He's already flicking. Players will start moving, then crouch as they're flicking. This is most notable when someone comes up behind you or like actually like completely catches you off guard. You just basically you start moving before as you're flicking, so you make their shot a little bit harder to hit as you're getting back yourself onto target. A lot of people at lower ranks, I see what they'll do is someone catches them completely off guard, and it's understandable, but they'll just do what you normally do when you do like a standard flick, which is you counter strafe and you flick at the same time. Whereas like, especially if you're standing still, if you're moving, it depends on how big the flick is, of course. But if you're standing still, a lot of the time, a good play is to you're not like trying to run, but you saw he started moving and then crouched as he was flicking just to make that shot a little bit harder for his opponent. In this case, didn't matter. Blame F does that a lot though. Works really, really, really well against riflers. But interesting game out of Jimmy, really tough game for Shuhei. And that could be a correlation where you have like certain players that they kind of play in tandem with someone else. So when one of them has a bad game, the other is likely to have a bad game. And then if both of them have a bad game together, it's almost certain to be a round loss. But yeah, Jimmy, supposedly, apparently, among the pro scene, I guess like arguably, because K Serrato's 0-14, but again, Furia has a lot of games where their whole team is below 1 rating. So it seemed like Jimmy is the most important player. If you want to have Maus win a game, a good bet is you really need Jimmy to have an over 1.0 rating.